just one other thing I want you guys to know you may not be aware of. I was in Oakland County a couple of days ago, and there was some guy named Brian from Wayne State had a petition board. And he wouldn't say nothing to me, but he spoke to a guy that was white. He was a black guy. He wouldn't ask me. So when later on I got to take care of my business where I was at in this building, I come back out, and he was on the bus, because he was on the bus and I got on it. And I said, what is your petition for? He said, oh, for the Tea Party. I said, what? And he said, oh, to make them a party, a legal party.
Put them on the ballot.
There's a movement for that.
So I was trying to tell him, but he wouldn't listen to me.
Well, we'll try to get to the Tea Party today if we have some time. But this, okay, Michael?
I want to say that a lot of governments in the world can be totalitarian, they can be police states, they can be dictatorial, but that doesn't mean they're fascist. Although fascism has all those components, just because you have those components doesn't mean you're fascist. There needs to be the mass mobilization, you know, the things that David's going to talk about in this article.
So,
here.
what I've done here, the book, as I said, is excellent. Anyone who wants to really study tactics and see what happened in Germany, but also apply it to the method of thinking for today, should read this. But it was best summarized by the author of the introduction, Ernest Mandel, has a nice summary which is circled, the front page of your thing, where it says 3, Roman numeral 3. And it goes for only about 3.5, 4 pages. And then, if we have time, we'll read a little second section, which was later on in the book, written by Trotsky. But that's only if we have time. And then again, we can stop along the way. And so, what it is Mandel basically summarizes this book and says that there were 6 components to fascism as described by Trotsky. Debbie, you want to start reading?
Sure. Trotsky's theory of fascism is a unity of 6 elements. Each element within this unity possesses a certain autonomy, and each passes through a certain development by virtue of its internal contradictions. But the unity can only be understood as a closed and dynamic totality in which these elements, not in isolation but in their intrinsic connection with one another, can explain the rise, victory, and fall of fascist dictatorship. The rise of fascism is the expression of a severe social crisis in late capitalism. A structural crisis which can, as in the years 1929 to 1933, coincide with a crisis of overproduction, and we know that situation here today, but which goes far beyond such conjunctural fluctuations. Fundamentally, it is a crisis in the very condition of the production and realization of surplus value. It is the impossibility of continuing a natural accumulation of capital under the given competitive conditions on the world market, i.e. with a given level of real wages, labor productivity, and access to raw material and markets. The historical function of the fascist seizure of power is to suddenly and violently change the conditions of the production and realization of surplus value to the advantage of the decisive groups of monopoly capitalism. Now, do you want to discuss?
Yeah, we can discuss. So we take a few minutes, then we'll go through. It's a fairly short piece altogether. So that's why what I had said was that it was a new phenomenon, late capitalism, because early capitalism was the 1800s, beginning of the 1900s, and it wasn't until 1921 that a full-blown fascist movement, and Hitler was 1933, and just before that, emerged in countries that were suffering tremendous economic crisis. And surplus value is just another way of saying profit. Profit made by workers doing labor. And I think we can go on. I mean, the quote again is the historical function of a fascist seizure of power. Mussolini and Hitler both seized power, took over the government. They weren't despite his big electoral numbers, he did not seize power legally and just was not an evolution. It was a counter-revolution or an uprising. In Hitler's case, he burnt down the Reichstag, like Congress, the Capitol building in Berlin, and then declared that the communists had done it and outlawed them and seized dictatorial power. So it was a seizure of power, but it's to violently change the conditions of production, basically, that they can't continue, they need to make more money, the capitalists do, and they're never satisfied. But in an economic crisis, they're really suffering. They're only making 10 billion instead of the normal 20 billion. 30.
Pitiful.
Yeah, but that's how they think, and so the only way you can make more is by making us poorer.
Yeah.
They don't make
Yeah.
anything, they don't
That's why they
create
can make a
anything.
profit. Yeah.
Workers who
Poor
make
people,
things.
Exactly.
It's only labor that creates things, and workers who pay taxes.
Don't have poor.
Rich people don't pay taxes. Michael, do you want to continue or just move along? If you don't want to read, you can pass.
Number 2, in the epic of imperialism and where the workers' movement has gone through a long historical development, the bourgeoisie exercises its political rule most advantageously, that is, with the lowest overhead through the bourgeois parliamentary democracy. This form of rule has 2 great advantages. It allows a periodic reduction of social antagonisms through the granting of certain social reforms, and it permits an important section of the bourgeoisie to participate directly in the exercise of political power through the bourgeois parties, newspapers, universities, employers' associations, municipal and regional governments, the summits of the state apparatus, the central banking system, and so forth. But this form of bourgeois rule, which is by no means the only historical one, depends on the maintenance of a highly unstable equilibrium of economic and social forces. When the objective developments disturb this equilibrium, the big bourgeoisie has hardly any alternative but to try to establish a higher form of centralization of the state's executive power in order to realize its historical interests, even at the price of renouncing the immediate exercise of political power. Looked at historically, fascism is both the realization and the negation of monopoly capitalist tendency, first noted by Rudolf Hilferding, to organize in totalitarian fashion the whole of social life in its interests. Fascism is a realization of this tendency because in the last analysis it has performed this historical function. In the negation of this...
It is.
Oh, did I read it?
Yes.
Okay. I have new glasses and having trouble here.
It is the negation.
It is a negation of this tendency because, contrary to Hilferding's expectation, fascism has only been able to perform this function by the extensive political expropriation of the bourgeoisie.
Yeah, Debbie, go ahead.
So, would you say then that in this country, this historically, to put what this paragraph talks about, would you say that, like, offering Social Security, doing Social Security, the 8-hour work day, and starting to implement certain kind of protections, limited protections in the workplace for workers, was that a way in which the bourgeoisie kind of, took the wind out of the workers' movement like in the 1930s, because
Not
they
just
certainly
1930s.
well, right, but
Obama.
yeah.
So that's what I'm saying, so just no jobs, right? That's what we're talking
Well,
about?
let's look at the first thing. First, they're saying that running a country, bourgeoisie is capitalist, big business, corporate giants. They're talking about the big capitalist class.